And hello, welcome to KelownaNow Live. I'm Jason Mann with Jim Check, and joining us this afternoon is Geoff Snicer. Geoff is with the Kamloops Citizen Safety Committee, recently presented at a town hall here, along with the Kelowna Citizen Safety Committee, some different bits of information, and some of it we hope to kind of go over today with our conversation. So welcome to KelownaNow.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys having me on.
I know we want to jump into things pretty quickly, but you just want to give me a quick 411 on your background and what inspired you to become involved in the community and political matters?
Okay, so this is not a place where I saw myself being at this stage in my life. I'm actually a bit of an introvert, so standing up and talking in front of people, even being here right now, is kind of difficult for me. But the reason I got involved is, sorry, did you want the history first?
Yeah, just a tiny. Yeah.
I probably confused him by saying not the history first.
So, I'm from Kamloops, British Columbia, born and raised. I've got family there. I've got family here in Kelowna, strong ties to both cities. I've lived in Alberta and spent about 10 years living overseas as an expat, working. I just qualified my job as an engineer. I worked in oil and gas just to make it easy for everyone. And I've been all over and seen all sorts of things, and I just really love Canada. I think we are so lucky to live in this country. I've seen the worst, and I'm hearing the best, and I think we have to hold on to what we got. I really appreciate it.
So you say you're an introvert, but you're now motivated to stand up. What's motivating you?
My two boys.
Yeah, so you want a better future for them?
Absolutely. I want my children to have the
What
same
scares you for the future then? Like what's making you stand up now? Because a lot of people are apathetic and they just don't, they're just like, yeah, somebody else take care of it.
Yeah, and that's the way I used to be in politics. But right now, what I see coming with legislation and everything is changing so fast around us that the future will be more taxes, less freedom, less energy for everyone. And I want my children to have the same opportunities that I had growing up. And that's why I'm standing up now.
And standing up, what does that mean? Like, what are you trying to change? Like, what do you what do you see as like? Are you looking provincially, federally, or both, or where do you see those freedoms and taxes being like taken from you?
Well, that's a bit of a complicated question, but to break it down simply, I think there has to be a grassroots movement, and people locally need to organize and get their local municipal councils on board with what the local people want. And that's one of the things that KCSC stands for in Kamloops,
right,
is local government. We don't feel like the local government represents the local people.
Wouldn't it be cool one day if we had technology where we made politicians obsolete, where you just woke up in the morning, all the issues are there, and you all voted? Now that's democracy, right?
Yeah, direct democracy.
Yeah. So everybody gets a say, as opposed to right now we elect somebody for 4 years, and then all of a sudden, the ship may be going somewhere you don't believe in, which I think is what you're saying right now. You don't believe in the course we're on as a good course for the future of your children.
Can I just jump onto that?
Sure, you jump on it.
One of the missions of the KCSC is we see that, you vote every 4 years and somebody gets into council and you expect that person is going to be advocating for what you wanted. They campaigned on it and you think they're going to advocate for 4 years, but they don't necessarily do that. And during that 4 years, they're influenced through all different types of stakeholders, special interest groups, the federal government, the provincial government, and
lobby groups.
Exactly.
Big problem, lobby groups, right?
So really what we want to do is we want to even out the scales and have the people who voted them in as stakeholders, official stakeholders through the association, pushing for what the people in the city actually want.
Because I think one of the things that Mayor Tom Dias wanted to do was actually create a registration for lobby groups here in Kelowna, so they have to identify themselves, right? Because, at least that'd be more transparent, right? Where you'd actually see who's lobbying who, right? Because, it's big business in the States and in Canada at the federal and provincial levels.
Yep, and that's very true. And then I think where we might differ a little bit is that we recognize also other levels of governments and organizations as lobby groups as well, even though they may not be considered official lobby groups. They're contributing to the governance.
So this organization, Kamloops Citizen Safety Committee, is that an organized group? Is that got a lot of members, or what is that?
Yeah, we're an association. Our membership is in the hundreds now. We started at the end of the summer. It was myself and another fellow by the name of Justin Cartwright that came up with the idea.
Right.
And we decided that rather than just have an idea where we get everybody together and complain about one issue and then all that energy is lost, we're just going to combine and just keep growing it in the association. And that way the association will always speak on behalf of the people.
That's how I got into coaching for 10 years with my kids, because I'm just looking out there and I'm thinking, what's going on? Right? And I say, if you're not going to step up and do something, then stop complaining.
What are some of the most pressing issues that you see Kamloops is faced with and Kelowna is faced with and the rest of the country and municipalities in the country?
So this is a big question. I could talk for quite a while, so you guys will have to reel me in a bit here. But I'll boil it down to sustainable development and the community development policies that are being pushed out right now. And that starts at the federal level and goes down to the provincial and then the municipal level. And what I'm witnessing, in my opinion, is a blurring of the jurisdictional boundaries between federal, provincial, and municipal governments. We saw it recently with the premiers were in Nova Scotia. They were quite upset at the federal Kickstart funding thing, I think it was called, where the federal government's directly involving themselves in the municipality. Mm-hmm. That belongs to the province.
Even the carbon tax issues.
Yeah, and then the carbon tax. So everything comes back to this sustainable development goals that we're signed on to. And I think once people start to learn about that and they see how much of our government policy is actually affected by it, they'll kind of step back and say, hey, maybe this is something we need to pay attention to.
Are there pieces of legislation that are particularly concerning to you that you've seen?
There are. So federally, there's the Pan-Canadian Framework, which commits Canada to meet the Paris Agreement. That's to cut the CO2 by 70% of the 2005 levels by 2030. And that is going to be a massive change in the way that we live our lives. That's only 6 years from now. This is one of the big problems. It's been legislated up there, and the provinces have bought into that, and that's why you see these changes being pushed through at the local level. And they're on a 5-year cycle. So every 5 years, the level of what they call climate action, which is the actions they take to reduce the CO2, increases. So we saw one in 2020 was the first level, and then 2025 will be the second.
2020, just to help the people that you were saying we saw something.
A little bit of context and background. So in 2015, we signed on to the Paris Agreement. Right. It was ratified in 2016. After Harper left office and Trudeau got in, they ratified it with several other countries. And then 2020, while COVID was happening, was the first step. And that was this rollout of all these climate action plans and the official community plans, which are kind of like the overarching bylaws in the cities, have all been modified to include climate action and a certain type of development to affect a better climate outcome.
And how would people see that though? Like, how do people see that on the ground? Like, I mean, what is that? How does that, affect a resident? Like, OCPs are done all the time.
Right.
They're usually like a 20-year OCP. So what's in there that would be different for people?
So I think the biggest change you're going to notice, and I'm not necessarily opposed to these ideas, but just talking about the changes would be the move from personal vehicle ownership over to active transport. There's a definite push for that. The carbon tax to punish polluters, so it's trying to change your behavior, stop you from using things that create carbon. What's coming up in 2024 here in British Columbia is something called the Alterations Code, and that's based on under the Pan-Canadian Framework. That's based on a country-wide code where they want to upgrade and retrofit all of the existing homes to make them more energy efficient, which sounds good until you find out that it may actually increase your debt levels, may increase your property taxes, and may cost you a lot more money in utilities. So those are the real issues that people will notice as these policies roll out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a concrete examples myself of that, but I know
like the requirement to have like a charging station in your home or something.
There's a good example in British Columbia would be the British Columbia step code. So not a lot of people are aware of this, but we're on a 5-step code, and we're currently on step 3. Then we'll go to step 4, and then step 5 is supposed to be 80% more efficient than when the code started in 2017. And part of that will likely include most of the OCPs for cities are being updated with EV infrastructure. So now if you're building a new home or doing a renovation, you'll be asked to install this charger and that electric infrastructure as well.
Right, which is basically a dryer vent or a dryer plug. I have one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's. I think that with anything, when they make those changes, there's organizations that may take advantage of that because, it's basically a 220 plug, right? So but
Yeah,
it's hard
when
to
I looked
it's
at
hard
it for
to
my car,
yeah.
I was looking at a $2,500 cost, right?
Oh, I got an estimate was $5,500, and I got it done for the cost of the permit, right? While they were doing my solar panels, right? So
Right.
I think it's definitely figuring out. I think with anything new, it's obviously something you need to figure out, right?
And I want to be clear because I'm not against having an efficient home. I think where I just want to be really specific. I'm against the government coming into my house and telling me I can't sell my house.
I'm a big fan of
without it.
incentifying people as opposed to punishing people. Like,
Right.
I'm a huge fan of solar EVs, like a better tomorrow for everybody, cleaner and cheaper energy. I'm against punishing people with a stick. Right, like forcing people to, like carbon tax, I think is a stick, because right now there's a lot of people and the people that get hurt the most are the people that can afford it the least, right? Because they don't get to go out and buy an EV or solar panels or stuff like that. So why are we punishing everybody with this great big stick as opposed to trying to incentivize people to move into a better tomorrow?
See, and I would agree with you 100% on that. I think incentives are the way to do this. Let the market
The only
take
way
care
to do
of
it, right? Yeah.
When the technology's there and it makes financial sense for people to switch, they'll do it
So
without you asking
let's
them
take
to.
iPhones for an example. Could we slow down the iPhone adoption when it was rolled out? When Steve Jobs announced that iPhone, like it just took off by itself. Like
That's
EVs will do the same thing. EVs are just better, cleaner, faster, more efficient, and a whole bunch of different things, right? So depending on the EV, but it'll take care of itself. So you don't need to punish people to push them into it, right? It should just allow itself to do it.
So are you aware of the Zero Emission Vehicle Act in British Columbia?
The one that says all new vehicles have to be made or ZEVs by 2030, I think.
Yeah,
it is.
so all 90% of vehicles must be zero emissions by 2040.
Is that all new sales, not vehicles
That was
on the road?
New sales, right?
Right.
But they've updated it to match the NDP's Clean BC program. So now it's on first reading, it's actually by 2030. So in 6 years, 90% of new vehicles sold must be zero emission.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that in other countries, and they've kind of like scaled it back a bit, because there are adoption rates that are not linear, so they kind of have that hockey stick moment. So,
And there's real issues too, like will there be enough cars? Can the car manufacturers provide enough?
I mean,
And
there's
that's
lots of
one
things,
of the
right? So,
justifications being used is saying that if they make it the law here, then the manufacturers will give us the cars before anyone else.
I think it's better to incentivize people, and it naturally happen, and capitalism will help that too, because people try to build cars. Like, I mean, if you take China, for instance, they have 100 EV manufacturers. 100 EV manufacturers. Like, we have Tesla, which is a North American manufacturer, an American manufacturer. And then we have a few of our, like the big three, that are trying to make EVs, right? Or they're stepping into it and resisting it big time, right? So we don't want to make it an EV show, though, either, right?
Well, yes and no, but I mean, on the other side of the coin, that we had conversation with BC United a couple of weeks ago, Renee Merrifield, and we talked about whether or not if the province or the country has enough energy to power that many EVs and that many homes that are going to be reliant on just strictly electricity. And then the other concern that you might have is where's the backup if that goes down in a very cold climate or extremely hot climate, for that matter, with some of the other energy sources that we have that may not be available to us then. So I think like there's some of that that I'm kind of interested in knowing a little bit more about too.
Sure. What's going down?
Well, how long did it take to build Site C Dam, and how much energy does it produce, and what does it power in terms of our needs today, and how many more of those do we need in order to, or what other sources of electricity do we, can we tap into? And I know you're a proponent to solar on houses, and everybody did that, but can we do all of this in 6 years? Is there a roadmap? Is there a plan? Is there even a rallying cry other than a legislative bat that's going to be broken upon people's heads?
I think it's a multi-pronged thing for sure. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's why you got to involve more people in the solution, right? Because I think sometimes government might want to think that this is the only road, and that sometimes gets confusing for people, right? And that's why people push back, right? And then they push back, and then we compromise and we find different solutions, right? So
Just on that topic about electricity and electrifying BC, so that's one of the goals of Clean BC, which is the NDP's environmental program. They want to electrify all the vehicles. Eventually they'll do heavy and medium duty vehicles as well. And then also the heating and space heating in your homes. So water heating and space heating. They want to get rid of gas by 2030. That's in the Clean BC program. By 2030 there will be no more gas furnaces being sold. And that's a huge change, and it's it's going from my diverse energy mix to a singular non-diverse energy mix. So if there is an issue, then it will affect everyone. And there are lots of anecdotal stories of these cold weather heat pumps not being able to heat homes above a certain temperature when it gets cold.
I had a heat pump in my house for probably 8 years, and I just replaced it with not a heat pump because the guy that didn't place it said heat pumps don't work in Kelowna. He said they're just not efficient here because of the way the temperature is.
And we've been hearing that story a lot.
Because what happened to mine is it doesn't run in the winter, so the piston kind of seizes, and then when you go to fire it up in the summer for your air conditioning, it just kind of stalls, and then so every year I'd call him and he'd say, "Oh, you just got to bump it, bump it, bump it." And this year you tried to bump it and then super bump it with this booster we put on it. It just wouldn't bump, and then so there you go. I got a new air conditioner. And I have solar, like I try to do everything, change the LED lights, do all that stuff, right? So, but he said, like, don't put a heat pump in. That's what he told me.
So I think this is great because you have the intention to do what's right, you know, and a lot of people do. But I think the issue is that the technology is just not there. So
LEDs are there, though. Like
LEDs are there. There's nothing wrong. I love LEDs. I love LED lights.
But if you take a look at that, if you look past LEDs, we did the first thing when Fortis and them came out and said, "Oh, you got to do those squiggly bulbs, like CFLs or whatever."
Yeah, I still have those. I still have those in my house.
What a scam that was, right?
Because
like replaced every light in our house.
And I was paying $22 for a light bulb.
And a huge thing. They supposedly last 15 years, and they all started burning out in a year.
And they're a toxic
and then they
mess.
Said, "Oh, hey, make sure you dispose of those."
I've still got the original ones. They're still running in my house.
I've got some extra ones for you.
Okay.
So that was oops.
Yeah, well, we've had a few oopses along the way, and so that makes everybody a little nervous when you start to see some of these plans sort of unveiled.
I think LEDs got to figure it out, though. But
yeah, sure. That's great. In terms of, is there anything else in terms of sustainable development that, you know, somebody who's watching this, who's maybe not plugged into, you know, the different pieces of legislation and how they're all coming together, but that on the ground, what effect it's going to have on your life? Is there anything else that's calling out to you in terms of red flags, warning?
Well, I guess, yeah, just in general, and, you know, I'm being very vague to try and summarize this because it is a fairly complicated topic, but when people think about sustainable development, what they're thinking about is developing, having the economy in a way that's in sync with the environment, that doesn't destroy resources for the future. But the word sustainable development is itself an oxymoron. You can't sustain and develop something at the same time. So you're either sustaining or developing. And just that alone is enough to give me pause when I think about it. And that's what a lot of these policies you see, they're just sustaining things, they're not developing them. On top of that, sustainable development is not just about the environment. It's now grown into 17 different policies pushed out by the United Nations, which Canada has agreed to support. And that's under the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030. It's on the Government of Canada website. And what they talk about are policy objectives on poverty, hunger, health, the economy, the environment, fresh water, food, agriculture. It's basically everything in our life. So that's the main message that I'm trying to get out, is that sustainable development is not just about the environment. We're not just being environmentally conscious. This is an entire new way of living and doing business. It's changing our social structures and our economy, and indeed that's what it actually says in the definition of what it is.
Does your organization have a mandate or like a set of objectives that it wants to accomplish, or?
Yeah, so for the KCSC, I guess we have 5 goals. Number 1 is to keep government local. We think that the government needs to represent what people want in Kamloops or Kelowna, not what the federal or provincial government has agreed with other countries.
Is that realistic, though? Like, how do you keep... Because lots of times, like if we take Kelowna, for example, when they do infrastructure work, it's usually a third and a third and a third, right? Municipality puts up a third,
they have to work
province
with
puts up a
Modi,
third, and then the feds put up a third. So how do you, and they usually want control with that, because they usually put provisos in there, like you'll get this money if you do this, this, and this, and that's how they kind of control it, the local levels, right? So how do you fight that then, or how do you change that?
Well, I guess I can't change that on my own, but the goal of the association is to give the people in the association, so the community,
right,
that stakeholder seat at the table. Because when those discussions are happening, with Modi, the federal government, and the council about where they're going to put a road and how that works.
Yeah.
They might have one public hearing where you get a chance to show up, and 90% of the people say they object to it, and then they ram it through anyways because that's what the government wants. So what we want to do is provide another vehicle for people to have a voice and be real stakeholders at the table.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, you look at Kelowna's still putting in sewer. You know what I mean? Like there's areas of Kelowna that are still in septic, right? So they would have got some of that money likely from the feds in the province to do those projects.
Yeah, and that is, and when you talk about incentives, that is a really juicy incentive for city councils to go along with the plans of the
That's what I'm
provincial
saying. So
government.
it's a really easy way to, you know, exert some control over, you know, municipalities, right? Because like if you want this funding, you know, these are the things that we're trying to move forward.
And, you know, if you read some of the legislation, like the Local Government Act and the way that they structure the OCPs, it's supposed to have the goals of the provincial government in there. They're broadly supposed to align. That's in the community charter. So there is a requirement that our councils do follow that, but there has to be balance. Because if the sole focus of the local municipal government is just developing the way the provincial and federal government wants us to, they're going to lose sight of the real effects to the people that live in the community, and that has to be balanced somehow.
Yeah. And what are the other four?
How do you do that? How do you legislate the rights of a individual, or not even an individual, but the population, the local population, right? Like, how do you incorporate that into I guess these plans and these policies that are being made elsewhere?
Well, that ties in with both of your questions, actually. So one of the goals of KCSC is to look at the local community development plans through the lens of your individual rights. So a lot of people don't consider what the city is doing as something that would affect their rights as a Canadian, but the city is implementing plans that are going to eventually affect how you can and do things in which you can do. So if we include that into the official community plans, just some very basic guardrails to make sure that the city is not stuck in this tunnel vision of development, that they are actually considering the rights of the citizens and their quality of life and their human experience. If we can consider those things and do the development, and then I think we'll have a better result.
What are next steps for you and the organization? I mean, there's a federal election on the horizon in a couple of years. There's a provincial election on the horizon in a year. So you've got a period of time before there can be any kind of like changes in that regard. Is it a grassroots initiative then that needs to bubble up and communicate and to get engaged, or how do you see affecting change? Or stopping change, or slowing change, or changing change?
So I guess there's
I'm confused.
I guess there's two ideas that I'd like to convey. So one is I don't think my time is very well spent sending emails to Pierre Poilievre or Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh. I don't think anybody reads them. It's so far detached from where I am in Kamloops that I don't think it's a valuable use of my time. I could do that for 8 hours a day. The effect would be nil. Where am I most effective? I'm most effective here talking to you. I have some impact. You can, feel my energy, see me as a human being, and really listen to what I'm saying. And I think I have a much greater impact doing that. So that's why we have town halls to convey these ideas to people and have a local impact. And the other idea is that it's about the jurisdictional boundaries. So imagine I voted in somehow federal level, I got the person to run Canada that agreed with everything I want. And I say, come save me here in Kelowna, BC, would you? And they would say, well, sorry, it's not my jurisdiction. That's provincial. And then I would turn to the provincial government. And then I would try and elect in through MLAs or whoever, get that person in that agrees with me. And they would say, that's great, Geoff, but your city council, the UBCM, all the lobby groups, and all the cities in all of British Columbia are all asking for more sustainable development. So I hear what you're saying, but that's not our jurisdiction. That's up to the municipality. So if we want to change these policies and balance it out, it has to happen at the local level, and it is at the local level where the cities are making these
Are you going to run for city council?
That's something
Because if you're looking to make change, it sounds like that's the change you want to make. So the best place to make change is from within, no?
You're right. And I think if I was presented with an opportunity where, it looked like I could get into the city council or even run provincially, I would probably try and do that. I don't think I'm at that point right now. I'm still finding my feet and learning.
But I mean, most change can be effective from within, right? Because I mean, banging on the door on the outside, lots of times, a lot of people won't answer the door.
Right.
And it is a bigger, more complex machine than most people think, right?
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Because they are, municipalities are kind of at the mercy a little bit to the province and the feds, right? Because when they ask for big dollars, it comes with like strings, right? So,
that's right.
And then so they're trying to appease, they're trying to, like, it's never a 100% like perfect answer, right? So you know what I mean? Like if they want that big sewer project, say they want $100 million, it comes with, we need to do these 5 steps. And they just think, well, I mean, it's the greater good, right? So, I mean, we've seen that greater good, and we've seen some of that really played out, like where it's hurt a lot of people, the greater good thing in the last few years, right? Where we've always put the greater good, and maybe it wasn't the best idea, and I think we've seen that. But I think if you want to make a lot of changes, somebody in your group likely needs to run, right?
And and I can't say that that's going to happen, but eventually, that's something that I might consider. Yeah. And it might not be me; it might be somebody else from our group.
I mean, just saying, like, and then figuring out more clear objectives as to what, because the toughest thing that I always find with people is like, I get the frustration from a lot of people, but then they're just like, if you ask them what they really want to change, then I think they're just like generally frustrated, right? And then that's the tougher nut, right?
We have an answer, and that like our actual end goal is to update the OCPs to include, I'm going to say, guardrails and protections for people's individual rights, property ownership, and to make sure that the community's involved in a real way.
For example, what a guardrail would look like?
Well, for instance, before the city approves any new bylaw or something, then they have to look at it through the lens of individual rights. Is this going to restrict people's movements? Is this going to invade their privacy? Is this going to put people in a position where they don't feel that they have the same movement ability around the city? Like a lot of these development plans are, there's a lot of great stuff in them, but there's a couple things in there that aren't so great. And if do you
have an example? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get to an example.
Yeah, sure. So a good example would be, from my perspective, is something called Movement as a Service. You guys have this here in Kelowna. I think they're Lime scooters.
Yeah.
So that's an example. It would be like Uber. You don't own the car, you don't own the scooter, but you rent it when you need it. Yeah. Okay, Movement as a Service. So what they want to do with the regional transport plan here is combine everything, all those companies and BC Transit into one giant app. So right now you have siloed control. So Lime controls the scooter.
You got to get an app for that, an app for that.
Yeah.
There's a commercial like that, an app for that.
Exactly. And then of course we have you and I who own our own vehicles, and we can drive whenever we want. But in the future, they're telling us they want less vehicle ownership and everybody to be using this app. So one single source of payment, one app that controls all the vehicles. Now suddenly the barrier to maybe turn that off or nudge or control your behavior is really low because it's just one database and one central point that the government can interfere with. Whereas right now, there's 100,000 individual car owners in the Kelowna area.
Right.
Plus
how
the service
far in
providers.
the future do you see that, though? I guess is my question.
Well, 6 years from now, 90% of vehicles will be legislated to be zero emission. And they have targets that 30% of us will not be driving, we'll be walking or riding bikes. So,
well, I'd say maybe the Lower Mainland, but I mean, it's tough to walk around in Dawson Creek and Fort St. John and Williams Lake and
that's exactly why we need to have this conversation.
I'd say 50 or 60 or 70% probably already do walk around in Vancouver.
Yeah,
it's a pretty tough city to drive in.
It's an expensive city to own a car.
Yeah.
Right,
Park
but
it,
there is transportation there available, right? Like it's. I've been to Paris a few times, and like, you don't want a car. Right, you can't afford to park it.
Yeah, and to be clear, like we're not arguing against this idea of active transport. I ride my bike everywhere. In fact, I was taking Kamloops City Council to task because they don't have a bike lockup. I rode my bike to the council meeting. So I love the trails. It's been there my whole life in Kamloops. Riding up and down Pandosy and down to City Park with my kids, love it. That's the way the city should be. Yeah. That should be there, but it shouldn't be there at the expense of other modes of transportation. And it's the the concentration of everything into one spot, which is the issue. I don't have an issue even with the app. It's just that if one group or one organization controls everything, then even if that one group goes down or they get hacked, then that's it. No one.
But
can
you have
travel.
lots of time then to run for a council and change all that.
Right.
Before that happens. I'm just saying.
People keep telling me that I should run. Maybe
Well, I mean,
getting
if you're
confusing.
trying to make big change. So I'll share something with you. Like I don't know if that would ever be possible where they control everything with one app. I don't see that happening, but maybe. But I do know that Tesla has a dream of with their cars going to work. So that car drops me off at work, and then it goes to work. So I don't need a parking spot for it. So it becomes an Uber at that point, a rideshare vehicle. And then it comes back and picks me up at night. And then it goes back to work, and it works all night long. And resulting in fewer vehicles and a car that actually works for you. And it becomes an energy source. I mean, there's a whole thing. I don't know if you've ever watched it, but there's a...
Yeah, this is getting into the smart grid where your car can fill in the energy grid and
Absolutely,
take
yeah.
power
It does
off your
everything.
battery,
It's
put
actually
it back on.
it actually starts making money for you and becomes part of the grid, right? So,
Well, that's one of the other issues. We kind of touched on it earlier, was the electrification of BC. So right now, BC Hydro's in talking to the BC Utilities Commission, and they're trying to figure out whether or not they're going to meet their targets. They have, I'm going to get technical here for a second. They have something called an integrated resource plan. They did it in 2021, and then they had to redo it in 2023 because they figured out that demand was higher than what they thought, and their demand curbing measures were doing less than what they thought. So that's why they put out a call for power. So after Site C comes online, their very base lowest plan, they're going to need another almost Site C by 2027.
right.
So they think
Or
that-
other alternative sources.
yeah, and they think they're going to bring it in from other alternative sources.
Right.
But they have another plan, which is called the Accelerated Electrification Plan, and this is what the back and forth is happening right now with them and the BC Utilities Commission. And that accelerated plan, so that would be, for instance, if the government just changed the legislation to make all cars EVs by 2030,
Right.
or they're going to come out with a code to make everybody upgrade their furnace to a heat pump. That's accelerated electrification, and that puts us behind another 2 Site C dams after Site C comes online, after the additional electricity they bring. So that is a very worrisome, and that's going to put us in a position where we're similar to California with brownouts. And just the one point I'll make here, and then I'll stop. The way BC Hydro thinks they're going to do this is with something called demand side measures, and it is exactly what it says. They're trying to curb the demand. And they have different ways of doing that. Timed usage is one, and the other one is smart appliances and smart grid, which you mentioned. And the timed usage, there could be different rates for different times of the day, or through
That's
the
what commercial users usually get right now anyway.
yeah, or through the smart appliances. They won't let you charge your car during the day. You can only charge it during certain times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is where some of the big questions come in, is can we actually do this as a society? Because there are physical limits of what we can do with the technology we have.
Well, I think that there's a cool thing that's happening out there called AI that is accelerating technology. So we have that on our side as well, or against us, depends if it decides that they don't need us. But but there is AI out there that we are seeing technology accelerate at an accelerating pace. Right. So there is solutions out there. I mean, I think in Canada for sure we have some of the best miners in the world, some of the best resources. Small modular reactors as well. They create a lot of energy, baseload energy as well. Solar, we live in a place that's very conducive to solar. So there is other stuff, and BC has like 98% of its energy comes from the grid. I mean, from hydro.
97% is carbon-free energy.
Yeah, so I mean, we're probably one of the cleanest provinces, if you look at it from their lens, the cleanest provinces in Canada.
Yeah, I think the cleanest jurisdiction in the world, or one of.
Yeah,
That's right
so
up
I
there.
mean, I think maybe they should just pump the brakes on the carbon tax and maybe reward us for what we have done, as opposed to like, hey, like you need to be smacked around a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Would burning natural gas for a few more years really be that much of a problem?
No,
and that's where I'm going to argue no.
Yeah.
And in the
Well,
face of
I just don't think heat pumps work, right? Not
Yeah.
here, but maybe heat pumps work elsewhere better.
But
right?
in the face of this housing shortage that we're experiencing, when they're coming out with new legislation and the provincial government's getting involved in municipal business to force the housing, but they're also requiring all these expensive upgrades on houses. It doesn't really make sense.
I would
And then
just-
when there's such bigger, juicier targets out there, like supplying Asia with, liquefied natural gas that would eliminate their need on dirtier sources of fuel or fuel from dictatorships and would, bring some prosperity to our country and some resources to escalate these plans to, improve our own electrical systems and so forth. Like, it seems like there's all these lofty ideas, but no real plan or consideration.
Well, I mean, I just going to go back to that. If we're one of the cleanest jurisdictions in the world and 97% of our energy comes from, fairly green sources, like, how good do we have to be before we stop getting punished for what we're doing?
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? Like we're like an A+ student. We're getting smacked around, right? So I do believe in. I'm a big proponent of solar. I'm a big proponent of EVs and all that stuff, and LEDs, and we really reduced our energy load in our home. But I do think most of that is for myself was through education, right? Educating myself, and I think that's what the government should do. Because right now, if you look at the failure of solar, there's a solar plant out there, but most people don't even know about it. You can basically get a free solar system for your home, but most people couldn't even figure out how to use the forms.
I think you can
Well,
get
this is
a
the problem with
$40,000 loan, no?
Correct, yeah, but I mean, most people don't know that or figure out how. We're going to have Gord Lovegrove in again because he said most of the only engineers can figure out how to get it, right? So that's a failure of government to educate people, right? So they probably have some good stuff out there, but how do we get the information into the hands of people, right? So, and I look forward to you running.
I keep hearing that.
Well, it must mean something then, right?
We'll see.
Obviously, sustainable development is a much larger topic than what we're going to even scratch the surface on here in this conversation, and even the elements related to housing development and our city infrastructure and everything else. How do busy people get a quick snapshot and try and figure out what's going on? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is there an easy way, or how do you get people a little bit more engaged and involved?
Well, I think the biggest effects that people will notice, their utility costs go up when they switch over to heat pumps. The heat pumps aren't working, so that's going to affect them. Their property taxes are going to go up with some of the funding mechanisms they're going to ask you to use. And like, these will be direct effects that people will feel. And next year, when they roll out the alterations code, people are going to be asked to start making changes to their homes. And that's going to hit them in the pocketbook. And they're going to immediately understand what these policies are. And I hope that's going to drive them to look further into it, because it will affect every aspect of their life.
All right. Geoff, maybe we have you back again for future updates.
Yeah,
We'll
I'd
have
be happy to come back.
Councilman Geoff back.
Do you have any events coming up in the next little while?
Yeah, we have on November 30th, it's Thursday in Kamloops, we have our next town hall with the KCSC. We'll again be inviting all of our local council members, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, to attend, and hopefully we'll have a good show.
Okay. All right. Well, Geoff, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate your time.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.